Hello again, everyone. This is Jeff Adler, continuing my video series, Why I'm Right 2.0. Today's chapter 30. We're now 30 episodes into this series, and you'll notice that they not coming so fast and furious. A lot of the stuff is off my chest, maybe, and so I'm just kind of taking it a little more easy now. But today's topic is actually probably one of the most important in our time, and one that I am probably as passionate about anything else that I speak about, and that is abortion. I have been kind of dodging this topic on these videos for a while and alluding to them many times, but I haven't actually settled down and got to it. But today's the day. I will tell you up front that because of the nature of this topic, I may lose it at some point here. Don't know whether it be from anger or sadness, but I warn you ahead of time. And there's going to be a part in this video that will be very unpleasant. So I warn you ahead of time for that. What's prompted me to do this now, as opposed to at any time in the past that I've been doing these videos, is a rash suddenly of Facebook memes and whatnot that I've been seeing going across the social media about abortion that makes my head spin, quite frankly. The liberal logic or lack thereof, the things that they concentrate on, the cherry picking they do, the hypocrisy that they seem to blame everyone else for but don't see it in themselves is stunning. Look, there's probably plenty to go around, and as you know, I don't tend to like being hypocritical, and so I will attempt to straighten a few things out here for those of you who might think that everything I'm going to say here today is one-sided and self-serving. I don't tend to like to do that. I like the facts and I like the truth, and I will make concessions where necessary. But let's just put it out straight. I am pro-life. When I was younger and could afford to be naive, I was in favor of abortions up to a certain point. And for the most part, despite what the left says about how far to the right and how far more conservative we are, I haven't really changed my view that much. Knowing the history, knowing the facts, knowing new technology, knowing about life from having lived it now, has certainly molded some of my opinion. But the basic stuff it's intuitive. Right is right, wrong is wrong, good and evil are good and evil. There's no getting around this. One of these things that I saw on Facebook was about a law in Ohio about the fetal heartbeat law they passed in April, where there are no exceptions for rape or incest or anything. If kid's got a heartbeat, must carry it to term, no matter what the age of the kid is. These kind of extreme laws are not helping, and they're not serving the greater good. This is where you would say, okay, point for the liberals because some conservatives went too far. But the problem I have is not just the extremism on the right, because it does go both ways. The other, and I'll get to that in a second, the other issue I saw had to do with a law in Georgia recently passed, I think in just the last week or so, that said that a woman could be charged with second-degree murder for having a miscarriage. And of course, that's how it was left. That's exactly how it was phrased in this Facebook rant, whatever. simply that a woman could face criminal charges of second-degree murder for having a miscarriage. Of course, it left something out. It left out the part where she has to have induced the miscarriage herself on purpose by drugs or alcohol or some other means, which are factually and historically known ways a woman would self-abort. It also fails to mention that it is very difficult legally to detect that intent. So even though it might actually be on the books, it's almost unenforceable. Point for the conservatives. The point is that it goes both ways. There's such a thing as in the Constitution known as the Supremacy Clause, which basically says that the federal law is the supreme law of the land, and that states cannot violate the Supremacy Clause by making laws that are on the federal books under which they have supremacy, stricter or less strict at the state level. This is why sanctuary cities are unconstitutional, because they violate the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, which states that the national level law, rules with regard to immigration, for instance. When the Supreme Court, rightly or wrongly, passed Roe versus Wade, it basically said that this is the law of the land at the federal level. So no law at the state level, whether more strict by conservatives or less strict by liberals, is constitutional unless it adheres to the federal law as written and as interpreted correctly. Otherwise, it violates the Supremacy Clause. So this stuff goes both ways. And so there's a hypocrisy where the left only wants the right's stricter laws banned, but not their less strict laws banned. Let's be fair. Speaking of being fair, I also noted in these same memes on Facebook that there was some complaint about women getting abortions out of state because their state was too strict. So let me get this straight. It's okay for a woman to cross state lines in order to get the kind of abortion or to get an abortion that she wants. In other words, shop for a state that gives her an abortion. But it's not okay for somebody to cross state lines to get health care. It's not okay to have health care allowed to be practiced in multiple states. You can only get, a company can only sell health care in one state. Remember, that was one of the big problems. Portability and crossing state lines is why we let a problem we could have easily fixed legally, which led to Obamacare. No, the liberals didn't want to allow, Blue Shield of California to sell health care in Nevada, for instance, which would have made competition, which would have dropped prices, and people could go shopping for this. No, but they have no problem with it with abortion. Again, if states were violating the Supremacy Clause, this wouldn't even be an issue. But since they are, why is it okay for one and not for the other? I'm just saying, let's be fair. Okay? Let's be reasonable. It's not an all or one thing. It's not we're all right and you're all wrong all the time in everything. Sometimes there's mitigating circumstances, and sometimes both sides can be right about different things, and there can be a compromise. Abortion is an issue that is rife for compromise. And in some respects, Roe versus Wade was a compromise. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But I just want to get that out of the way because that part of it was chewing at my brain. let's talk about a little history here. How did we get here? How did we get to a point where a large percentage, not a majority by any stretch, but a large percentage of Americans are fully committed to killing babies in the womb? Let's just call it what it is. How did we get here? Well, this isn't a new thing. It wasn't started by the sexual revolution in the 60s. It goes back more than 100 years to the days of Margaret Sanger, who was not an abortionist. She was a eugenicist. She believed in the sterilization of certain races, specifically the blacks, to limit their number, which would allow the white race to maintain supremacy by sheer numbers. This is a woman who has statues and memorials and special days set aside for this monster named Margaret Sanger, all praised by the left. She was basically Hitler before Hitler. In fact, Hitler got a lot of his ideas about eugenics from her and her ilk, as we've mentioned in previous videos. We've gone from sterilization to abortion. Stop the more humane way, you might say, is sterilization, if you can call that humane in the first place, because of the reasons they wanted to have it. Wasn't very humane. Wasn't very civil. It was racist in its base, in its beginnings. But at least they were trying to avoid having children, because they at least recognized 100 and some years ago, perhaps, what life was and how sacred and precious it was. But now we've gone through the whole gamut. We decided to, as a country, as a civilization, as a society, as a culture, in America anyway, and some other more liberal places around the globe, that we were going to try to play a game where we will treat life with a little less dignity, a little less preciousness, in order to gain some convenience, to gain some sort of means to right a supposed wrong. Now, in my book, I briefly discuss the lies about how we got to Roe versus Wade and some other stuff. I'm going to get into the weeds a little more here, but suffice to say that after running through the gambit of trying to balance this thing, it's completely tipped the other way. The idea of sacredness of life, the preciousness of life in any form, not just in the womb, but outside the womb, is gone. We are raising entire generations of people who are numb to life. Video games, movies, other things that just show people just being blown apart, pulled apart, shot at, killed in every possible way without any restriction whatsoever, and basically a ho-hum yawn. What's the big deal? We have a whole generations of kids who have some mental disorders, partly of which have less and less care whether or not somebody lives or dies. They don't have a sense as much as to the preciousness of life or the sacredness of life or the sanctity of life. They are numb to it. It's a shrug. It's an whatever. And that is leading to mass shootings and a whole lot of other things. The mental health aspects of our country have also been documented in this video series. Margaret Sanger, I don't know if she actually started Planned Parenthood. I think it was started on her behalf because it was under a different name when she started it, but it eventually changed or morphed into Planned Parenthood. And this organization gets probably over $500 million a year from your tax dollars from the federal government. As I said before, if something is so important like PBS or the National Endowment of the Arts, if something, an organization is so important that it has to exist, then it would exist on its own. It would not need federal dollars to keep it alive. If Planned Parenthood was such a great thing, then people would donate to it. It wouldn't require subsidies from the federal government. But alas, they get a huge chunk. This organization promotes abortions. They don't just provide them, they promote them. And they, people say, oh, well, Planned Parenthood does all these things for women, and they provide all these great services. And no, they don't. They outsource most of the other services. The only thing they tend to do in-house is the abortion part. Oh, they might do a couple things here and there, and different Planned Parenthood offices might do a little more than other Planned Parenthood offices, but on the whole, they outsource almost all the women's services that are routine and concentrate almost solely on abortions. They lie about statistics, they lie about procedures, they lie about the cause and consequence of everything they do in order to promote more of it and to get more funding, etc. And we will prove that. They even go into schools and indoctrinate children. You might say, oh, well, it's part of health if you're in high school learning about abortion and whatever, and the consequences of pregnancy and blah, blah, blah. But no, it's not stopped there. It's not even just in middle school or junior high school. It's in kindergarten. Look it up. It's a program called PERP, P-E-R-P. I didn't write down what it stands for. It's in my book, but for brevity here, go look it up. The PERP program from Planned Parenthood, trying to teach kindergartens about abortion. Why would you need to do that? Just asking. And of course, Planned Parenthood has been routinely caught on video camera dealing in and selling fetal body parts. Despite their denials and despite the fact that we've kind of forgotten all about it, this was a huge thing about a year or two ago, and I didn't forget. More history. Roe versus Wade made abortion legal when the Supreme Court decided to take it up. They're very concerned about overturning Roe versus Wade, and they ought to be. And most of the reason is because it wasn't done constitutionally. It is on very specious legal ground. There's a complaint that says, well, banning or reversing Roe versus Wade won't stop abortions. No one said it would. All the conservatives are concerned about is if you're going to have a law about abortion, it ought to be done constitutionally. And we'll get into what's constitutional and what ain't in the next few parts. The 14th Amendment was also used to legalize it prior to fetal viability, which is, of course, who decides what fetal viability is? With modern technology has changed that and made it a lot sooner than they used to think. Permitted abortions up to fetal viability, but it also allowed abortions to go all the way to time of birth, for health reasons. Of course, they broadened the term of health reasons. Mostly it was believed to be for the health of the mother or the child. Those were going to be something that would cause a death by virtue of having a child, and abortion was allowed all the way up to the time of birth. That is the law of the land. No other abortions, more strict or less strict, are allowed by that definition. But abortion advocates have stole the anti-abortionists' hope prior to 1973 Supreme Court ruling of them being safe, legal, and rare. Because estimates have abortions now at about 1.2 million a year, and well over 60 million abortions have occurred since Roe versus Wade. Prior to Roe versus Wade, there were a lot less of them. What happened to the rare part, folks? Proof that somebody is pushing to have them. And in the next part, we'll talk about the morality and the lies and the truth of what's been going on in the abortion world. See you in part 2.